Sustainable Brands, and they have a new metrics conference. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a 10-minute version of the 15-minute version that I gave at Sustainable Brands, and then just open it up for thoughts and feedback and ideas. And I heard a few comments when we started. There's a convergence between community and business right now that's very interesting, and there's a blurring of lines. And one of the interesting things from our research, and I say our, and we had 2 interns from BGI, and are now looking at another intern from the East Coast to kind of help us wrap things up. But Tasha Copeland and Laura Ippen were interns with us for the last 4 months, 3 or 4 months. And so when I say we as my business partner and those 2, what's interesting is that social capital, which goes back to Aristotle, and the first social networks, which were documented as far back as Aristotle, is uniquely similar to human capital in that it depreciates from non-use, not from use. And so when you don't use social capital, and you don't use human capital, then there's a depreciation. The blurring of lines between community and business is written about very, very widely. Robert Putnam wrote Bowling Alone. I don't know if you've read that. When we go way back into the definition of a social network, we're looking at, and social capital I should say first, we define it, or it's been defined historically, as civic governance with free individual choice. That those 2 things can happen. And so we have a declining trust in social capital in the world today, if you believe Robert Putnam's research. And so because we don't trust civic organizations and government to do for us what community has done for us in the past, it's only natural possibly that we look to companies to say, hey, I don't have the right compensation. I don't have the right health care benefits. I don't have the right things that I need to live on the earth. And so when you see Anheuser-Busch tell the NFL, and the NFL will be 100 in 6 years, our $2.6 billion is on the line because we don't believe your decisions about domestic violence align to our moral code and ethics, you can see this blurring is very financial as well. So the companies are now getting involved in social issues when they weren't before historically. So human capital goes back 60 years, the definition does. And human capital in the definition is really a way to say there's an asset based in humans and employees. And so about 60 years ago, the term was first supposedly noted as defined as the employees and organizations that bring asset to the organization through their work. However, we don't recognize this asset. In a hospital, a CEO has assets. What are those assets? If a hospital CEO looks at his or her assets, and by the way, 85% of healthcare is nonprofit, and those CEOs do very well, their assets include hospital beds, built on real estate, and buildings. So the more sick people there are, the more assets the hospital has. And the MRI machines that we demand we need in order to be healthy are all part of the asset base. But when push comes to shove and there's pressures on costs, the number 1 cost in the organization are the employees, the nurses. The difference in your getting out with health or with peacefulness about your loved one's health or loss are the people, not the MRI machines, not the assets. So what happens is we look at human capital as our greatest asset, but it remains technically only a cost on the balance sheet. And we don't aim to figure this out in our research, but we do aim to bring 60 years of research into a consolidation and thought leaders from around the world to say, what could this mean? And I'll say ironically, it's the social movement through CSR experts and sustainability that are going to make this happen. And I challenged the room at Sustainable Brands with that because I found it ironic, having worked over 20 years with HR professionals, that they're actually a barrier to this. Almost every HR person that we talked to said, you will dehumanize human capital. You will dehumanize employees. So they mean the right thing, but they're not seeing it from the lens of what the great intentors are. So really quickly, these are the barriers that we found so far. There's not an accounting line item. So FASB and SASB don't have, FASB and GAAP don't have a way to say, Looney, you're part of our greatest asset line. We're going to put you on take you off only being an income statement expense and add you as a balance sheet item. There's no way to do that, so that's a barrier. Ownership. HR is worried about slavery, right? We own you now. You're on our list. Metric use and inputs. This is just a jungle. There are so many many metrics, they're used inconsistently, they're gathered inconsistently, and sometimes they're not objective. Most times they're not. Measurement effects. What happens when we start to measure things, especially we know this in sustainability, we become obsessed with the metric and not what the input was. And then finally, leadership complacency. We're a bunch of senior executives and leaders who have been rewarded for lean, getting more efficient, and that resulting in a greater profit. So we have a model and a system and structures in our organizations built on those priorities, not built on the things that fuel that. So some of the people that we've talked to, or thought leaders that we've looked at in companies, have really had great intent on this. And I would say 90% of the thought leaders we talked to said, oh my gosh, this has to happen, and it was for the right reason. They said, we really need to uphold the decisions that we make and be more mindful about how we're making decisions and how that actually will result in a better top and bottom line. So there's management. There were a lot of management leaders, an HR guy who used to lead for Toys R Us during some of the early days and some of their more bold decisions about humans. Executives that we talked to, and they're really interested in it because they want strategy to be tied to the way they make decisions. Accountants, we've got two accountants, one on the East Coast that started New York Presbyterian Hospital. He's an accountant and he's an attorney and he's a management expert. And an accountant in the UK who's like, we've uncovered this box of hope. The first call was extremely cynical and negative, and now he's like, okay, what can I do and how can I help you? And they want to help figure this out. Impact investors includes conscious capitalism, and then this should say research, consulting, and academicians. So we talked to all of those, and they said, how can we help make this happen? Really quick, we have 4 case study companies, and they fall on a spectrum. The first is Seattle Healing Arts. Have any of you heard of this? Okay, this is where I accidentally doctor, and it's awesome. So NDs are naturopathic doctors, and MDs are medical doctors. They partner at Seattle Healing Arts and have a holistic view of your care. Now you still have the choice, but my family doctor spends an hour with me every year. She asks me about my sleep. She asks me about my relationships. She asks me about how much I drink. She asks me about how much I exercise. We have this full conversation. Have you meditated? Things like that. She's tapping into things that are about me that I might be open to. So Seattle Healing Arts had a strong visionary. This is where we first saw that you have to have a strong visionary that says, this is underneath everything that we do. We don't have it all mapped out. We don't have it figured out. But this is the direction we should be going. Call Cheryl. Okay. Sorry about that. And Seattle Healing Arts has really been cautious about saying we're going to jump on the EMR bandwagon, because they're not so sure that it actually will change the quality of care. And they actually have what they call a benevolent dictator approach, where all the structures are in place, but each practitioner is an independent practitioner and can make his or her decisions. So there's autonomy, there's entrepreneurship, which is the second theme of the companies that we looked at. Really quick, why are we looking at these 4 companies? Why did we select these 4? 1 is they were willing. 2 is they have human-centric attributes that differentiate them in their marketplace. And when we say human-centric attributes, they actually make decisions about humans that fly in the face of what their competitors do or what others might pressure them to do, like shareholders. The second company we looked at is Infusionsoft. They're based in Chandler, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. This is a startup that's growing rapidly. They have a chief people officer who spoke at CultureCon 2 years ago, and we were Googling human asset, and he said they're our greatest asset. Their dual decision-making points for everybody that's hired is caring and productivity. You can't care and not be productive. You can't be productive and not care. So if you're faced with a challenge, you think about those 2 things, whether you're an individual or a manager. They have no HR. They figure that if leaders can't help their employees figure it out, then there's a problem. I mean, there's certain rare things that might come up, but they truly believe that leaders and managers should be equipped to support that. Finally, they have a dream manager. That dream manager's job is to help you tap your dreams. Maybe you want to open up a nail salon. Let's figure out how you'll do that. We know you're going to leave here. And the chief people officer, from a CSR perspective, will say, are the people when they leave here better than when they came in, and are they going to do great things in the world? Third, we studied Caesars. We talked to Gwen Magida, thanks to Hunter Levins, who introduced me to Gwen. Gwen is now based here in Seattle. Side note for BGIers, she's fabulous. She's their head of sustainability, or one of their big leaders for sustainability. Why is Caesars up here? Gambling organization, right? How human-centric can this be? In so many ways they're human-centric. They have a long way to go. Here's what's unique about them and the next company. They actually had an upswell during layoffs in the financial crisis of employees who said, how do we help save Caesars money? And half of their employees are unionized. In saving the company money, it all became a green initiative. So the green initiative was environmental, and guess what that drove? Engagement. So instead of saying, let's get everybody engaged so we can do sustainability, the amazing thing wasn't that sustainability created engagement. It was their CEO saying, wait a minute, we've got to change where we're headed. We've got to embrace this upswell. We've got to leverage it and kind of define. So Code Green emerged out of that. You can read a lot about Code Green. The fourth company is Interface. This is really where it all began. For us, there was an article written by Paul Herman, the hip investor, and he was working with them. They are the only company we found who's intentionally trying to figure out how to put human capital on the balance sheet. They don't call it human capital. They've been on a 3-year journey and they don't have it figured out yet. But they're looking at their inputs. They're looking at the ways that they can quantify the value that people contribute. This is 20 years of sustainability-driven vision. This is Ray Anderson saying, we exist as leasers on this planet, not owners. Everyone that's hired has a thought process associated with that. And so then you build engagement from that and you build other acts. So the point is that if we're going to measure something, if we're going to put humans on the balance sheet, the low-hanging fruit is compensation, which scares the crap out of me, quite frankly. Now, compensation is a hot issue, and we should figure out how to make it fair and equal, but that can't be the only way we say humans are of value, because we know that pay is messed up. So in the short term, how do we figure out the other value? How do we figure out the innovation piece? How do we figure out the engagement piece and the contribution? Really quick, there are hundreds of reports. Interface has stopped doing a lot of sustainability reporting. Caesars looks at G4 and some GRI, but really, we've really got to look at this from an education perspective and from a metrics perspective. What are companies using that are so far ahead? And what are companies really going to be using in the future as it relates to measures and metrics? And for us, that's human capital. Finally, the conclusions are, it comes down to vision and leadership. Is there a strong vision? Is it aligned to humans in the beginning? If it's not, it'll be very difficult to build human capital into the value of the organization. There are 5 barriers to address, which I listed, which include accounting, metrics, management, ownership, leadership, complacency. The 4 forces for good, I actually had a blog posted in Sustainable Brands. And the 4 forces for good, if I can remember them, are millennials. And I've had a few people challenge me, isn't it boomers too? And I say, are they a force? Like the millennials are. I'm not sure they are. I'm not going to say they're not, but I'm not sure they are. The millennials are a force for good with so much data out there. Secondly is conscious capitalism and impact investing. The social business model, so the social enterprise, social entrepreneurship is an absolute force for good. There's money going there, there's decisions going there, there's graduate students going there, there's a lot of things going there. And the 4th one I can't remember. It's in my blog post. And then cultural specific attributes. When it comes down to it, whether it's Pinchot or it's Interface or it's REI, it really depends on what's underneath the culture that we can center humans in such a way that we can then say, how can we measure this? But we have to know that first. We can't just say, hey, what they use, we'll measure it that way. And then finally, we've got a lot of writing and analysis to do to put this down. We hope to come up with a business case and some models. We're going to share this freely and widely. We'll have a white paper, a shorter white paper, and then we'll have an e-publication of everything. We're consolidating all of our thought leaders into one place. I welcome feedback and ideas on that. We're thinking a web page or a website where we can connect them so that we can connect Gwen with Interface because they haven't talked. We connect Infusionsoft to Interface because they haven't talked, and we connect our 2 accountants because they've never met, and just say, okay, we're going to accelerate the conversation on this across so many years and figure out what happens next. We're not sure. Hopefully this will inform our consulting practice. We didn't set out to do that, but it's become fairly supported, so we'll see. So thank you. That was our Sustainable Brands message. I'd love your questions either now or later. I'd love your feedback, and this isn't uncharted territory, so I'll candidly say companies may not be ready yet, and companies may not have the resources, they may not have the energy, it may not be leadership complacency, it may be leadership bandwidth, but at least we have focused on something we think has been untouched.
Steph, thanks.